recently I went down a bit of a rabbit hole when it comes to why it is that when you level match something with LUFS, it doesn't always sound level matched. Sometimes it sounds close, but not really level matched. So I wanted to figure out, what is it? How do they come up with how LUFS is measured, right? And in doing this, I uncovered this Gearspace thread, which imparted a lot of knowledge. Whenever you compare something, like I was comparing a mix in the box to a mix hybrid, and the most important thing when you're comparing two mixes is level match. And you'll see these in comments all over the place. People say, you got to level match, level match, level match. The problem is we have a solution for level matching that's not as good as we really hear. So as a result, everyone's using integrated LUFS on all these streaming platforms. It was widely adopted. And this is why I say it's a little bit of a conspiracy. What is it based on? So I figured out, I did tons of research to figure out what's going on here. And what I figured out is, and you guys might know this already, it's basically a weighted RMS reading. So RMS is a mathematical calculation of the waveform, the positive waveform, the negative waveform. They add it all up. They do the square root of. They take it's just math all day, but it's basically just math, taking nothing into account about how we hear. So that's in layman's terms what it is, right? Now, what is it exactly that we're doing? And I know some people are going to be like, the way I just explained that was wrong. I know it's wrong. I'm not a scientist in a lab coat. But the point is, I understand that it's math. And that's why it doesn't always correlate exactly with how we hear. That said, what is LUFS? Integrated LUFS. What is that? It's a K-weighted RMS measurement with gating, in layman's terms. Now, let's break this down, because I think some people might want to know what this is. And I really wanted to know it because I wanted to know what the best way is that I should be using to determine how level my mixes are from one to the next when comparing. Should it be RMS? Should it be LUFS? Integrated? What is it that I should use to make the most accurate determination? What is K-weighting? K-weighting is a low frequency roll off. The amount of base frequency information that they let through on the LUFS calculation is actually too much. So, and when you look this up, you may find it says like 100 hertz roll off, but the point is, it's like not enough. All right. It should have been more of a roll off higher up. Now, what's the other side? There's also a plus like 4 dB gain around 1 kilohertz to 3 kilohertz. And a lot of people who have problems with this as a reading and like why it's RMS with these filters added, essentially that low filter getting rid of the low cut, getting rid of some stuff, but not enough. And then it's boosting 4 dB from 1K to 3K, and should be more focused on maybe 3K or 3.5K and up is the theory. So in uncovering all this stuff, what occurred to me was like, well, is there any better solutions? Is there any better way to calculate this? And, this is the standard that's been widely adopted. But if you're ever comparing your stuff and you find an integrated measurement doesn't really tell you the full story, you still hear a big difference. It could be simply because the calculation that's being used is not a perfect calculation. It doesn't really do the trick. It kind of does something. And since we're all using the same measurement, that's probably better than this guy and this whole bunch of people in this part of the world using one type of measurement and everybody else using another. So it's probably better that we're all using one measurement. This Gearspace thread was interesting. There was one particular guy who was a huge proponent of this other tool that was invented a long time ago. And they had this theory I want to share with you. So this guy T-Pad is saying the gating function in the LUFS group is a Band-Aid fix to make them barely acceptable. Everyone has probably forgotten that those algorithms were failing rather badly when they were initially released without the gating in there. The guy who invented this CBS, other, type of loudness measuring, this guy, I think his name is Bob Orban. I think that's his name. It's Orban is his last name, but like CBS broadcasting, like I said, like the radio like deal. That's what we're talking about here. The CBS technique doesn't include gating because it responds to audible content in a way that more closely resembles loudness growth and summation. There is no gating in our hearing, which would lead one to wonder why you would need to have it in the measuring equipment. Let me just talk about what they mean. When you're taking an integrated LUFS measurement, they incorporate gating mostly because the LUFS measurement as a whole was not created for music. It was created for broadcasts that were a wide range of varying things, from spoken word and speeches to music. So there'd be all these pauses if you think about somebody speaking. There's like gaps in time that would be so low on a LUFS measurement, not low in terms of low number, but very quiet, where they would skew the measurement too much. It would distort it to make it not accurate. So they had to put some sort of gating in there. The problem is, in music, things never get that quiet. It never gets that quiet that actually, those extreme gaps in time and space are not the same kind of a factor. There could be quiet sections, but it doesn't get quiet enough to really enact the gate to make these sort of gating things work, which is another sort of problem with it per se. But if you did have a piece of like a passage of music that acted like human speech with all these spaces between it and, tons of gaps, the gates would work to make that measurement more accurate. But in music, it's just never that way. It's always above the threshold, so the gate's never working. But LUFS techniques sort of, kind of, coulda, shoulda, woulda resemble loudness perception, but then they don't. You use them at your own peril. I pointed this all out 5 years ago. I first started posting on Gear Sluts. The CBS technique was developed 50 years ago, and it has stood the test of time. It should have been selected as the loudness measuring standard instead of this RMS concoction, but the fact that it wasn't shows you what happens when politics and ego get involved with so-called scientific endeavor. Now everyone's paying the price. Now, I can't weigh in on whether or not that's true. I just find this kind of thing interesting as a topic of understanding why maybe we all have this LUFS as a standard and what went into it. And maybe there was something that was better for more well suited for the job, and why that wasn't picked, is an interesting thought. So when I went into this, there's this guy doubles down right here. He goes, and he's referring to a paper. Bob Orban made a paper, like he wrote this white paper thing where he really went into detail about the problem with LUFS measurements compared to a CBS measurement, and he like outlined the differences. And somebody said that paper is dated because it didn't have gating at that time. The LUFS measurements didn't have gating at that time. And wouldn't you know it, the fact that he mentioned gating would help the measurement, and then they implement it, it really puts some stock into what this Mr. Orban was saying about why the measurements all messed up. So the fact that he pointed that out before everyone implemented everything the guy knows what he's talking about here. So, but now let's talk about TPAD. What he wrote here is, I attended all those presentation meetings during the development of what would eventually become this BS 1770, and just sat in the back of the auditorium and watched. The old saying that a camel is a horse designed by a committee. Well, that's what I thought the loudness measuring thing was turning into. So this was a guy sort of watching how it all played out. And in stark contrast was the development of the CBS method. No committee, but 4 really sharp research guys, Bauer, Torek, Rosenheck, and Allen. I don't know about you, but I trust those names. Those are solid names. I'm joking, of course. Who really knew what they were doing. Okay, these guys knew what they were doing. You should read their IEEE papers, or as I like to call them, the IE papers. Very impressive. By the way, Fabian, and this guy Fabian is Tokyo Dawn Fabian, if you're familiar with Tokyo Dawn plugins and stuff. He chimes into this thread too, which is cool hearing his take on it. So I want to actually just show that real quick. Where's Fabian at? Fabian, where you at? Fabian talks about just he has several posts in this, but I thought this was the main, most important point, Unit 1 from Fabian, where he wrote, the main difference between the basic LUFS case and RMS is nothing else than a well-specified frequency weighting. Like, that's the difference. It consists of a high pass plus a little boost at high frequencies, so-called K weighting, before the RMS calculation. This is T-Pad tripling down. I find this guy's replies pretty interesting. So K weighting is a problem. It's basically wrong. That's what he's saying. The high frequency shelf that supposedly corrects for head diffraction is a joke. If you want to impose high frequency EQ to somewhat account for ear resonance effects, then it should be shaped to peak up around 3,500 hertz like CBS does. So what he's talking about here, head diffraction. That's what your girlfriend does. No, seriously. It's the sound bending around your head to your ears. The diffraction. The wave's it's hitting a surface like your nose and your head. It's got to get here. That's head diffraction. The RLB low-frequency roll-off in K weighting is also wrong. As Orban alludes to in his white papers, it lets in too much low-frequency information that is not contributing to perceived loudness. So they should have left it at B weighting. I've been studying all this since 1979, literally, when I was designing the leveler mentioned above. So I've got a few years on everybody when it comes to understanding all the ins and outs of loudness perception. It appears that everyone drank the Kool-Aid and jumped on the LUFS bandwagon before they knew what they were dealing with. I tried warning everybody about this 5 years ago, and everyone pretty much stuck their head up, you know where, and ignored what I was trying to explain. Anyway, I don't see what all the preoccupation is with making loudness measurements in a mastering context. You pretty much assemble the material, tweak it by ear to give a good uniform flow. You don't need a meter to do that. That's really the point, I think, is that a lot of these metering deals were implemented and started, and they had broadcast in mind when a lot of them came out. Now, all this being said, obviously, I was very focused on figuring out what this CBS meter was. So I went to Orban's website, which is, CBS, I think, went bust a long time ago. Orban came out with this plugin that's, a meter plugin that does this. However, when I downloaded it, my Mac said, no, don't open that. We can't verify nothing, So I was like, uh-oh, and trashed it. Couldn't open it, unfortunately. So I think it's too old to be used or implemented on my system, at least, or with my operating system. But maybe if somebody has Windows or whatever, they can give it a shot. But, interestingly enough, my computer's also been bugging out a little bit ever since I downloaded it. But that's for another day. By the way, that Orban meter is free if anybody wants to try it. It's just try at your own risk. I don't know what's going on over there, but my Mac wouldn't deal with it. My Mac said, no. Because somebody said, what about, maybe it was patented, and that's why they couldn't license this technology, and patent expiration period is 20 years. So if the CBS technique had been patented roughly around 1970 when it was developed, the loudness movement started around 2000. So the patent would have expired in 1990. The loudness movement started around the year 2000. As to licensing, no one seems to have any problem licensing Dolby's technology. Or how about MQA? I'm not familiar with any of these. If there was an issue with licensing CBS, which I don't think is the case, why couldn't/wouldn't they license the technology? Actually, I think it was NIH. What is that? National Institute of Health. As I mentioned above, I attended those study group meetings and sat in the back of the room and watched what went on. I've been around, and I'm pretty good at detecting the true motive that often lurks behind enthusiasm. There were some people involved with the loudness study that looked like they had an itch to go invent something that they could attach their name to. Dun, dun, dun. You know how you could tell when somebody has an itch before they scratch it? Yeah, I don't know if you can, but I appreciate what he's saying here. Whether it's true or not, it's interesting as a concept, and that's, take it with a grain of salt, but I find it interesting, okay? They could make a movie about this. There were some people involved with the loudness study. Itch to invent was something they could attach their name to. It was somewhat of an ego thing. CBS wasn't convenient to that end because it had already been invented, and so it was deliberately ignored. Pretty sure that is the real reason it was not considered for the loudness standard. I'm like, how do I know that name? Orban. And then I remembered on the Eric Valentine interview on Produce Like a Pro from like years ago, he's talking to Warren about how he got, his snare to sound a certain way on Third Eye Blind and Smash Mouth, and they're talking about this Orban equalizer. I don't know about you guys. Isn't it somewhat at least interesting to come up with like, a reason for why we hear better than the meters tell us, so that when we level match, we never really get a level match. It's why it's so funny to me when someone says this one's louder than that one or whatever. Like, you're never going to get it to sound the same. There's no technology that exists that, I don't care how widely implemented it is, it's not good enough to really level match where we won't hear a difference. With two different sources, you'll always hear a difference. So stop just chiming that from the top of a mountain. That assumes, by somebody saying it's not level match, by somebody saying that, what they're really saying is they don't understand that things can never really be level matched to where we won't perceive a difference because the whole system's flawed. So to me, that's the truth of the matter. No matter, you got to start to dig deeper than just perceived volume when you're comparing things and giving something value in terms of what you like, which one sounds better to you. Like, it can't just be solely on volume because it will never be right. So you have to look deeper. You have to sort of ignore slight differences within volume, even if we always think something's louder is better. I like to do the test where if I think something's louder, sounds better, try to make it a little lower than it is, even when the LUFS are level matched, even when, and some people were saying on here, if you just take the loudest part of something, often an RMS reading gets them closer to what they think sounds level match than a LUFS reading. Like, there's no right way here. On one song, that might work. On another song, it might not, when comparing two different things. So it really depends on what you're comparing. And as soon as you change instrumentation, as soon as something's a little brighter than something else, as soon as one has a little more effect on something, of whether it be reverb or delay or compression, a little different, any direction, it's always going to sound different. Between the milliseconds that you're hearing it, it's going to sound different. Like, your hearing is going to perceive differences at the same volume. So, just people shouldn't get so hung up on level matching everything, because it's not even possible, really. Like, you can get close, but it's still going to be different. Someone wrote, imagine what mastering would be like if there was no such thing as loudness meters of any kind, everyone using their ears instead of their eyes all the time, an unattainable audio utopia. Maybe I'll disable all my meters for a week and see what happens. I think the guys that really know what they're doing never are shooting for a LUFS value at all. So the LUFS meter serves almost just as like a blanket to just, warm yourself up a little when you want to check a value and feel like, you're not shoveling snow in 20-degree weather. I mean, it's something to, okay, all right, I see. There it is. But it doesn't matter. Like, if for the most of us, it really doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter to you. What your LUFS reading value is, it really shouldn't matter. And imagine a world where none of us had them. Imagine a world where the VU meter was all you got. It's an interesting world. It's an interesting concept. I think people would be fine. I think music would sound way better. I think all the people who are, not quite there wouldn't chase a LUFS value. They'd realize sooner than not that whatever they're doing has to sound the way it is because of what it is. And they'd use their ears more, so they wouldn't destroy stuff just to get it close to what they think. Something's in my eye, of course. So, they wouldn't chase a LUFS value trying to get it close to what, whatever Post Malone did last week or something. And now you got to, oh no, what do I do? I'm not even close to that LUFS. That's what's killing everything. But anyway, it's a whole concept here. It's a whole thing. It's a whole can of worms. LUFS, man. So what's the best way to level match your stuff? Well, do it two different ways. If anybody can get a hold of a software version of the CBS meter, bada bing. Maybe I'll talk to Rick Carson and see if we can get that CBS in a meter. Let's go. I don't care if the whole world uses something else. I want the best way to level match something so that when I'm comparing two different things, it's actually level matched, which would be a more, a weighting that made more sense than this K weighting nonsense. That's what I think. A better level match, man. That's what's up. Something. So anyway, it's an interesting thought, this whole thing. And really, that's the only thing I care about these metering things for. So I can compare two things that I know without it beyond a shadow of a doubt are going to be level matched. So that for that reason, that's really all I care about it for. I don't need to change the world. Everybody could be on integrated LUFS. By the way, LUFS, whenever anybody says LUFS, they usually mean integrated. And if you're looking at multiple measurements like momentary or, short term, the sliding 10-second, if you got a T, no, you want integrated, which is also referred to as program loudness on the Clarity M, from start to finish of the material, whatever that is, the whole thing integrated LUFS. That's what you want. And that's the thing I'm saying is not the best judge of what's really happening volume-wise. And RMS sometimes sounds closer to me, and sometimes it's way off. So it really depends on the source material. So there really just isn't one that exists that's right yet, in my opinion. Which leaves us all in a position where anytime we compare anything, we'll always get a couple groundhogs being like, level match! It's been level matched. Which way do you want me to do it? Which flawed way do you want me to level match? What's going to satisfy you? The head diffraction's all messed up. Talk to your girlfriend. All right? Evan Jaffe Custom Cut Studios. You guys got this. Take it easy.